Hello again, whiskey friends. Thank you for joining everybody for another whiskey review. And here today we are going to break down essentially the sequel to my 2022 Whiskey of the Year, surprisingly coming out of New Riff. So we have the New Riff High Note collection here. This is a 100% malted rye 8-year release coming out of New Riff. Man, we are going to have some fun breaking this thing down, and I'll go through all the stats momentarily. But this has been floating around Northern Kentucky in particular. Keep an eye on this one. This one is a top pour of the year potentially. Stick around and find out where all the scores came. So, thank you for joining me today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. All right. We're going to pour a little bit here, let it open up a bit off to the side. And let's talk about this bottle a bit. So, as I was saying off the top, I have been a huge fan of the new Riff 100% malted rye mash bill. It initially came out around 2 to 3 years ago at this point, and it was a 6-year bottle and bond release. Then last year, as a special release, New Riff released a barrel proof version of this that was 7 years old but finished in sherry casks. I adore that pour. Once again, it was my 2022 Whiskey of the Year, which is pretty surprising for New Riff, of all things that came out last year, to be my Whiskey of the Year. I think that's pretty impressive. Now, with this one isn't finished in sherry. It is just a straight 8-year blend. And I won't go into it too deep here. Let's pull up the stats. We'll discuss it a bit further here. So, when it comes to the inner details of this particular bottle, we are talking about 118.2 proof. That is actually pretty high proof for New Riff. It's also 8 years old, 8 years age stated. I love that because that essentially means that New Riff has been plotting this from the very beginning, and from the very beginning, they hit a home run. And this was also $70 coming from the distillery. I have been seeing these around Northern Kentucky recently, so keep your eye out if you're in the area. Also, keep an eye out if you can get it shipped to you. But with the 100% malted rye mash bill here, since it's been coming out, it's been 60, 65, $70. New Riff keeps their special releases very tight on the pricing, very reasonable. I don't really think they've gone above $70, at least for their own stuff. When it gets to the MGP, that's a bit different. So let's get into this pour here. We're going to break down the nose, get into the palate, go through all the scores. But man, spoiler alert, this does score pretty darn high. How high? Yeah, let's find out. So let's get into the nose first here. Cheers, everybody. Man, I love the flavors of this nose. I could spend quite a bit in this nose, not necessarily to break it down for its depth, but just the pure appreciation for some of the flavors that it brings. A lot of the flavors that it brings are so crisp, and some of them are even like, I don't know, it's a unique combination of flavors. So I guess I would describe it up front as, gosh, if you got like a local, pastry shop, a local bakery, you go in there in the morning when the donuts are just fresh and put on the shelf. It's got a lot of that donut fry dough kind of action, but then there's also all of that sweet cream frosting to balance it out with some sweetness, and then all of those fruits come through. On the fruits, I've been trying to figure out what flavor to bring up to it. I want to say blood orange, but I'd say the citrus is even deeper than blood orange. But then I'm like, man, what's deeper than blood orange? It's a combination though of that blood orange and tropical fruits. So mainly mangoes, coconuts combined with that blood orange. So you get all of those fruits. And then there's a note on this that I particularly adore, which is essentially like the green macaroons, which would be the pistachio flavored macaroons. Man, I get that on the nose. Talk about a unique note to call out. Pistachio macaroons. But yeah, you just get that donut shop, macaroons, all those citrus flavors with that sweet cream frosting. Oh man, it's just delightful. I suppose it's missing some of the darkness there. You don't necessarily get that 8 years, that oak. It doesn't even have like that oak depth presence to it, so that knocked it down there. But man, it is really, really good. Let's get into the palate. Oh man, up front, rich, oily, dense, thick. I mean, it just coats everywhere. So that's wonderful from a barrel proof rye. The main thing that you're going to get up front is going to be those tropical fruits fighting through essentially kind of like a sweet coconut, shaved coconut sensation, balanced with a whole bunch of spices. When I say spices, I'm going to really refer to kind of like the baking spices, not necessarily peppery like you might say for a rye, but more of the baking spices, going back to that donut aspect that I was calling off the top with everything else that was going on with that bakery. All right, let's get in the mid. Man, mid escalates. Really, really appreciate the flavors going on mid palate. Doesn't necessarily have the complexity, but that combination of that blood orange and those tropical fruits is really, really delicious and unique. Then I suppose it does get balanced out in the end with finally that oak presence. So that 8 years does show up, particularly on mid palate, with just some bitterness, some darkness, some char on that oak presence, which is really inviting on a rye, especially for my preferences here. And it all accelerates into the finish. Let's get into the finish. Mm. Gosh darn. I love those flavors that it gets mid palate. And everything continues on into the finish. Everything that's good about this pour just continues to accelerate, escalate, and elevate into the finish. So the blood orange, the tropical fruits, all of that is there. The doughiness of it, and then it's all held together once again by that oak presence that really appears mid palate, continues into the finish, binds the whole thing together, and you really get that oak presence, that barrel presence, that char presence, which is it's just so nice on a rye like this. So when you're describing something as all these tropical fruits, the sweetness, it needs some base. It needs something to like even it all out. And I think that's finally where that 8 years shows up to complete this experience. Now, the finish itself, it does kind of fall off. I wouldn't say rapidly. It hangs for a little bit, but it doesn't hang for as long as I want it to hang based on the mouthfeel and everything else that's been going on. I think I do miss that sherry presence compared to last year's release when it comes to the finish. All right, let's get into the final scores here. So then when it comes to the balance and the value, golly, I mean, it's hard to expect much more from this. What it's giving each step of the way is really, really impressive. They really honed this in. Once again, this is the best thing I think that New Riff makes. So they've really figured out how to get the most out of this 100% malted rye mash bill. And as I said off the top, this is $70 for a special release that is 8 years old. Costs essentially the same as what it was when it was 6 years old. I mean, New Riff has been doing a great job keeping their prices in affordable ranges for those that are fans of the brand, which is who these should be going to. So then, as we break down all the scores that I just went through, we can summarize these into 3 categories: flavor, experience, and value. Flavor score, I mean, you've heard me gushing over this thing the entire time. It got almost 87.5% of all the possible scores when it came to the flavor, 84% when it came to the experience. The thing that held the experience down relative to the flavor was more just the complexity element, the depth element. If they finish this at 8 years or 9 years next year, oh, that'd be wonderful. Yeah, that would fill out all of it, and then this is just going to score even higher for me. And if they continue to keep it at $70, all's the points for value. Just take them. Just take all's the points. So in the end, that brings it to a 87 out of 100, which is a pretty darn impressive score. For 2023, that brings it to the 11th highest score out of 63 bottles released in 2023 that I've reviewed this year. And then when it comes to the all-time rankings, regardless of year in release, it's 22 out of 114. So that's a pretty darn upper tier pour for what's going on. And then we'll just have to see how this, this late in the year, we'll see how this plays into some of my favorite pours of the year type of videos that I'll be doing here very shortly. It's always fun to have a dark horse come in towards the end of the year. So that breaks down what I think of the New Riff High Note 100% Malted Rye. Once again, one of the best thing that New Riff releases. I mean, we haven't gotten the chance yet to see what their bourbon can do at 8 years. Hopefully that's coming next year. I don't know why it's always been 4 years with the bourbon, but we continue to get experimental mash bills like this at 7 years, 8 years. Gosh, come on, release the floodgates, New Riff. We're so close. This is doing so well. But as long as you keep creating this 100% malted rye and hopefully finish it in sherry again, please, I will be raving about it more and more. So if you've had this, let me know what you think of this particular pour in the comments. And until the next whiskey review, I'll catch you all later. Goodbye, whiskey friends.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you